Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, first off, I'm sure you've all seen the news. Trump has been acquitted, meaning that he was not, in the end, charged with impeachment. Whole thing went on pretty much like we expected it to go. A lot of these, I'll go into a few stories tonight, but a lot of these things, honestly, it's political theater, it's media drumming it up to get attention. I think we've been saying for a while now, they don't have the votes to pass it. And sure enough, they didn't have the votes to pass it. Yeah, everyone, happy Valentine's Day as well. See some of your comments. Good to see you all here. Now, I'm going to go into a bit of what happened with the impeachment. I want to go over actually Trump's speech afterwards. I also want to go into what's happening now with Biden and gun control. Also, I think it's better to call gun restrictions rather than gun control. And so I'll be going into that as well, and a few other stories also, so stick around. I will be jumping. Now, as usual, folks, as always, if you have questions, leave them in the chat. Try to get to them. And go over a few stories first. Yeah. Lynn Fay, good to see you. Paul Wojcicki, good to see you. You said from Arizona. Courtney, happy Valentine's Day also. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, good to see you all here. All right, folks, let's go over the first story for the night. So this is Epoch Times. It says Biden calls for Congress to restrict gun ownership. Now, just some brief context of this. Remember that just recently, Biden told different gun rights groups that he was going to be moving on this. And here we see him now making some moves on it. One interesting thing with this is he's not doing the executive order move like he has been. He's actually going through Congress on this one. But of course, Democrats having the supermajority right now, it's probably going to pass anyways. All right, let's go into this a bit. It says President Joe Biden on February 14th urged Congress to strengthen existing gun laws concerning gun ownership on the third anniversary of the mass shooting at a high school in Parkland, Florida. And Biden said in a statement, quote, "The Parkland students and so many other young people across the country who have experienced gun violence are carrying forward the history of the American journey. It is a history written by young people in each generation who challenge prevailing dogma to demand a simple truth: we can do better, and we will." And he continues, "This administration will not wait for the next mass shooting to heed the call. We will take action to end our epidemic of gun violence and make our schools and communities safer. Today, I am calling on Congress to enact common sense gun law reforms, including requiring background checks on all gun sales, banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, and eliminating immunity for gun manufacturers who knowingly put weapons of war on our streets." Now, there's a few big ones in here. The biggest ones would be banning assault weapons. They already ban high-capacity magazines in some states. This is basically magazines with like over 14 rounds. I think it's even less in some states. And then also, they say eliminating immunity for gun manufacturers who knowingly put weapons of war on our streets. How now? Okay, a few points on this. How do you define an assault weapon? First of all, a lot of people who know about guns know that there's no such thing actually as an assault rifle. And the way you categorize this is usually based on like the grip and the way the magazine is. There's funny classifications for it. And how do you knowingly put weapons of war on our streets? What then constitutes a weapon of war, and what then constitutes doing so knowingly? As I mentioned, really, what it seems to be doing, what the Democrats and Biden campaign seem to be doing, I mentioned they're probably not going to ban guns outright, even though I think they want to. I think they're not going to move forward that strong, but what they're going to do is take actions to make it difficult to sell them and increase the pressure on people who own them. And it does seem to be the case that this is what they're doing. Now, and they say eliminating immunity for gun manufacturers who knowingly put weapons of war on our streets. Actually, yeah, I think we can actually expand this maybe a little bit to people who knowingly put weapons of war on our streets in many places, like Barack Obama and Fast and the Furious, and supplying, say supplies to Hezbollah in Latin America. Maybe that should be included. Yeah. Anyways, we'll have to see how this goes. Now, what there's a few different parts on this. First of all, yeah, a lot of people are saying they're having trouble buying ammunition. It's not actually clear whether the difficulty in buying ammunition is because something's happening to go against these people. I haven't seen any information on that. But we have seen information on people being very concerned that laws like this are coming out, and so people are buying a lot more ammunition. I know if you go to some states like California, they do put restrictions on even ammunition you can buy. A lot of people are concerned about that as well. States like New York, well, New York City in particular, it's so difficult to own a gun here. It's almost impossible. And unless you're a criminal, then it's okay, usually. All right, let's go into this a bit deeper, folks. It says, and real quick on this, keep in mind some places that have very, very strict gun laws, like Mexico, like Brazil, for example. Of course, I have friends in these countries, and they'll tell you as well, like, yeah, it's hard to get a gun legally, but look, criminals have them left and right. And this is one of the challenges you have with these laws. Now, people blame America for it. That's actually not true. China's Norinco is one of the biggest arms sellers to Latin America. A lot of people have been saying, at least the ones I've been talking to, that this will get the legal guns off the streets. If you want to regulate it, gets illegal guns off the streets. The problem is that illegal weapons will probably be about as difficult to get as illegal drugs. And as we all know, it's impossible to get illegal drugs. They're nowhere to be found in America. And so if they regulate them the same, very likely there won't be any issue of them on our streets in the hands of criminals. I think we can count on them to handle this just as well as they did getting illegal drugs off our streets. All right, folks, let's go deeper into this. All right, it says, in the afternoon of February 14th, 2018, a man identified by authorities as Nicholas Cruz, now 22, walked into Majority Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland and opened fire with an AR-15 rifle. The shooting left 17 dead, including 14 students. Cruz, who is currently awaiting trial, could face the death penalty. Now, after the shooting, a number of Parkland students and parents began agitating for stricter gun control laws, arguing that Cruz shouldn't have been able to obtain a gun. But others pointed to failures by law enforcement, including safety officer Scott Patterson, who has pleaded not guilty to criminal charges for not entering the school building to confront Cruz and urged restraint on new measures. Biden said during his 2020 campaign that he supports stronger gun control. Last week, administration officials met with gun control advocates including Shannon Watts, founder of Moms Demand Action, and John Feinblatt, president of Everytown for Gun Safety. Now, won't go too much deeper into this. Real quick, though, of course, NRA is trying to lobby. The Biden administration is also going after the NRA, the National Rifle Association. So there's a lot of action now against gun owners, a lot of action now brewing against the ability to own what they call weapons of war. Now, a lot of people may not know, and I think most Americans know, but people in the country is kind of why we have the Second Amendment. Now, there's two different ways of thinking about this. One is hunting, being able to take care of your family. Two is, of course, personal defense. But three is being able to keep government in check. The reason the founding fathers had big parts of Second Amendment protections in the Constitution, why it's in there, is to make sure that Americans will have the right and the ability to overthrow a tyrannical government if that ever happens. This is one of the pieces of the Constitution. It also tells people they're allowed to have a standing militia. In other words, a military capable of fighting back against a tyrannical government were the government to ever become tyrannical. These are supposed to be weapons of war, according to the way the framers wrote the Constitution. Keep in mind, that was one of the reasons why Texas started the war with Mexico. The Mexican, well, of course, long story short, right? Spain gave access to the Texans to go into Texas, which was part of Mexico during the time, to basically create value to the land. Santa Anna took over Mexico, said he wasn't going to honor the Spanish agreement. Texans got concerned about this. Then the Santa Anna regime went and tried to seize their cannons, not their guns. And they made a big flag with a big cannon on it that said, come and take it, right? And long story short, Texas became a free country, a country first, then became part of the United States. The issue with gun control is not just about guns. It's not just about self-defense and hunting and, shooting birds and stuff like that. No, it's about being able to defend your country, not just from enemies foreign, but also enemies domestic, meaning a tyrannical government were that to happen. And having the ability to fight back against a tyrannical government is part of the way this country was built. Again, why we have the requirement and ability to have militias within the Constitution. Now, of course, people interested in changing the Constitution are interested in, of course, getting rid of this. And the Second Amendment is regarded as the biggest safeguard for all the other rights within the Constitution. Now, that said, there's a few other things to consider with this. First of all, federal rights versus state rights, federal law versus state law. And I'll be getting into it in just a bit. We're already seeing signs that local governments and states are not going to support this. They might be going in the opposite direction, actually. And we could also expect to see pushback against this. Again, one of the reasons why I would say the Texit movement, Texas trying to leave the Union, is a good discussion to have. Because actually, not just in the United States Constitution, not just in, say, even some basic declarations on human rights around the world. Some people even argued, according to the UN Declaration of Human Rights, that the right to self-defense is actually part of this. And you could argue that the right to life, right? Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness being the basic rights under which government is basically created, instituted among men to protect, that gun control is part of that. The ability to own guns, I should say, is part of that. Because your ability to defend your life is also your right to life. And if you remove people's ability to defend their lives, well, then what do they have left? Now, a few different parts on this. Now, some people say, can't you just call the police if you're in trouble? Of course, that's one side. That's the home defense element of it, which is one piece of Second Amendment and why people believe we should have it. But, you could say the same thing to Biden, right? Why do you have 10,000 armed troops around the Capitol building carrying weapons of war, literal weapons of war, on American streets, right? If you're really afraid for yourself, well, that's why you have the police. You could just call the police if someone breaks into the White House. Why don't you just call the police if there's a problem? You have the police right there. You know what I mean? Yeah. Anyways, we'll get a bit deeper into this. What we're going to be seeing in the country right now is, I think, a big discussion, not just around, again, federal rights versus state rights, federal government and law from the federal government versus state government and their laws, which we're going to start seeing in, I think, a lot of different ways. In fact, I have a story I'm going to get into in just a minute. We also have the issue as well of, again, the discussion on the Constitution. I think Texit is going to lead the discussion on this, really. And yes, Stephen Uha is saying, what if police are corrupt? Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm kind of being tongue-in-cheek on that. The police, typically police, just on the question of, why do you need to have guns if the police can come and rescue you? I don't know if you folks realize, in some parts of the U.S. where you're not in a city, response time for police is not quick. I know in some parts of Riverside County, where a lot of my family is, officers, oftentimes they'll have the sheriffs work as the police. They will commission them for different areas. And you're going to have very few police in very large areas, to the extent that if an officer is in danger, it's going to take sometimes over an hour, sometimes up to 2 hours for backup to come. And if you're in New York, you got to think, what's 2 hours? That's like coming from Pennsylvania to New York. Imagine if you're an officer and your life is at risk and you need backup, and your backup is in Pennsylvania and you're like in Manhattan. That's the reality in some parts of this country. And typically police are responsive. They respond to crimes that have been committed or are in the process of being committed. Usually means that if you don't have the ability to defend yourself, it's going to be too late by the time they get there. It's just one of the realities of it. They're reactive, right? And proactive policing is a dangerous concept. That's like pre-crime and like stuff like that, predicting potential criminals or something. And you can't do that. And so the ability of people to defend themselves is fundamental to the protection of life. All right. And anyways, back to the point though, we're going to see two big discussions emerge. We're going to see first up the discussion on federal law versus state law. And we're also going to see the big discussion on what is the nature of the U.S. Constitution. And what is the nature of the abilities to protect themselves under the Constitution that we are granted? If federal government is pushing back against the basic foundations of this country, then they are not following the Constitution, they're violating the Constitution. And as people sworn as part of their swearing in to their offices to protect the Constitution, every government official, police officer, and member of the military will have taken those oaths. Are they following the oaths they swore to uphold? Again, this is going to be a big discussion we're going to have in this country. And actually, I do believe that Texit is going to play a big role in that, as will local governments possibly filing lawsuits against the federal government. I really think we're going to see a lot of this. And we're also very likely going to see a lot of police refusing to enforce these laws. We saw this before, for example, where sheriffs in different states and different counties, have made videos stating they will not enforce laws like this. And so it's going to be state by state, county by county, that these laws will be changing. The big problem you're going to have with the new Biden push, it seems to be, is that he's not just looking to restrict certain types of firearms, right? Potentially, because he says assault weapons, which the definition for that isn't really set. Right? Assault weapons. It's going to be the issue of them trying to remove legal protections for gun sellers. It's basically alleging, it seems, that people who manufacture firearms can be held legally liable if people carry out violence with their firearms. Now, look, you can do the same thing about cars. What about medical malpractice in big pharma? Maybe we can remove the legal protections where the federal government pays with taxpayer money reimbursements for the trial process when people die of bad vaccines or have bunk vaccines harm them. There's a lot of different things that people die from where people do have legal protections, frankly, a lot more than you do with guns in this country, where they have legal protections and you can't go after them. Why selectively go after just this one area where, funny enough, it's the stopgap, that line that does not get crossed, that makes sure federal government doesn't become tyrannical, right? All right, let's go into one more story, then I'll go into some questions, and we'll go into a bit what's happening with the impeachment. So this is Epoch Times again. It says Utah governor signs bill allowing concealed carry of firearms without permit. And this is interesting timing for this. The governor in Utah, again, signed a bill that lets you carry a concealed carry firearm, typically pistol, right, without needing to get a permit to do so. In other words, getting rid of these gun control laws almost entirely, to some extent, at least with concealed carry. It says here, Utah's governor on February 12th signed a measure into law that allows people in the state to carry a concealed gun without a permit. And Governor Spencer Cox, a Republican in his first term, said in a statement, quote, "With the passage of this bill, Utah joins 17 other states with some form of permitless concealed carry." And he said this bill protects Second Amendment rights, reduces permitless open carry, which is already illegal, and includes significant funding for suicide prevention. Now, House Bill 60, which was sponsored by Republican State Representative Walt Brooks, a National Rifle Association member, NRA, states that an individual who is 21 or older and, quote, may lawfully possess a firearm, can carry a concealed firearm in a public area without a permit. In other words, if you can lawfully own a firearm, you can also have a concealed firearm in a public area without needing a permit to do so. Former Governor Gary Herbert, also a Republican, had vetoed similar legislation several years ago. According to state data, Utah officials issued over 26,000 concealed carry permits in the fourth quarter of 2020 and renewed another 18,095. As of December 31st, 2020, there were 718,218 valid concealed carry permits in the state, including some 290,000 for Utah residents and 427,639 for non-residents. Now, won't go too deep into this, but again, what we're seeing is two different approaches to this. On the federal level, we're seeing a push. Biden's not pushing it through executive action. He's asking Congress to move on this. And Congress moving on it is going to be, we'll have to see how it turns out, because again, Democrats do have a supermajority right now, and Republicans don't always vote in lockstep. Now, interesting thing to consider, look at crime rates in areas with tight gun control laws versus crime rates in areas with loose gun control laws. You'll find pretty high gun control in places like Detroit, and again, pretty high murder rates in places like Detroit. A lot of times, gun crime is committed by unregistered and illegal weapons, and oftentimes in areas where people shouldn't have owned the weapons in the first place, meaning that maybe it's not the guns that have issues, maybe it's the laws in some of these places that have issues. And yeah, you can look at many countries, including many parts of Latin America, with very high murder rates with guns that actually have very tight gun control laws. I mean, I could go over data with this. You look at Australia, for example. Yes, gun violence went down after they got rid of all guns, but the murder rate based on percentages versus the US and the way murder rates fluctuated stayed about the same. You know, if people want to commit a crime, they typically find other ways to commit crimes. And in countries like France, where you have very tight gun control laws, and ironically, you have people having gun battles in parts of the streets now because you have no-go zones. You've had terrorist attacks where people drive trucks through crowds. You know, crazy people find ways. Guns aren't going to be the things that typically stop that from happening. Guns are going to be the things that allow good people to stop things from that happening as they take place, typically. All right, folks, let's go into some questions for the night. Let's see here. This is from Eric Scanlon. You said, how much verification has went into China training in Canada? Is that legit? If it is, any reason given for that? Okay, so I'll go over what I've found with this. I have not verified it fully, but I have looked into some of the evidence, and there is some credible looking evidence. Let's go into this just a bit. Now, when it comes to what's happening in Canada, there are allegations that China has military training camps on the west coast of Canada. Now, I have not personally verified this. I haven't had any good sources that have been able to get on the ground and see what's happening. There's been different attempts I know of to confirm it, but there are some media in Canada that have had articles on this, just tracing back the origins of the stories. The news articles I've seen are not from media I'm familiar with. They don't seem to be big media in Canada that have reported on it, at least not the original stories. But they do have photographs, and I've seen many people as well posting, alleging this is taking place, that it seems to be the case that there's some kind of camp in Canada, basically, and somehow the Canadian government has allowed Chinese individuals to wear military uniforms and conduct some type of training there. Now, the data on this in terms of proven data is very hard to find. And so it's really not clear what the heck is going on in Canada with this. I've heard similar claims about other things. For example, Chinese troops going to Cuba and having there's allegedly a very large troop presence in Cuba as well. And I've heard other allegations as well, things I can't confirm. The Cuba one is the Cuba story is a pretty credible source I had on that. Although honestly, I don't know if there was any stories written on it. It's just information I've gotten through my networks. It's not really clear. I would say it is something deeply concerning. If you've ever mentioning that Rebel News had the story, yeah, I did see Rebel News' story on it. And tracing back their sources, it's from some media I'm not familiar with in Canada. The original reporting was not Rebel News. It was another media, from what I saw at least, unless Rebel News did follow-up stories. So in other words, yeah, I can't fully confirm it, but the rumors seem at least you shouldn't write them off, in my opinion. You know, this is kind of the way I look at news. If I can't verify something, and if I can't disprove it, I also don't disqualify it. You know, I can kind of categorize things in my mind as credible possibilities or credible claims or even just claims. I don't necessarily have to say something's absolutely true or false until I can really look into it. And I did try to look into this, and I don't have the means of really investigating it right now, unfortunately. All right, this is from Robin Raptosh. He said, how is Biden's contract with Huawei going to affect national security? I haven't seen a big contract with Huawei. I do know that he got rid of a lot of protections, which would allow Huawei to possibly do more in the United States. It's not clear at this point. I mean, if you did have China gain control of the electric grid, if you did have China gain control of the, say, high-tech 5G information type grid, it would be very dangerous because, okay, let's go back, right? Anyone remember back when Barack Obama and Xi Jinping met together to talk about China's cyber attacks meant for cyber theft? Right around that time, Barack Obama had indicted 5 Chinese military hackers with General Staff Department, 3rd Department, Unit 61398, which was about one of 20 operational bureaus that were under that cyber branch of the Chinese military, focused on cyber attacks. They were the signals intelligence branch of the Chinese military, kind of like the NSA, roughly. They reorganized it since, but really the basic roles have stayed the same. Now, those guys never actually stood in court. Nothing really happened with that. And then Obama was going to meet with Xi Jinping. What happens? Edward Snowden comes out like the night before and makes these allegations against the NSA, releases documents, tries to go to China, allegedly, ends up in Russia. You all know the story. Now, what happened during that conversation is part of the agreement that Xi Jinping and Obama had signed at the time was that China would no longer use cyber attacks for the purpose of economic theft to benefit their economy. They signed the paper. What do? Now, they kept doing cyber attacks to steal our intellectual property regardless, right? But here's what else they did. Rather than just use cyber attacks to steal intellectual property, there were reports showing that right after that happened, what does China do? It starts redirecting internet traffic through China Telecom, which means that they get to see every bit of data going through the networks anyways, meaning that they can just steal the data just going through the networks. They make undersea cable deals with big corporations like ABC Corporation, do all kinds of stuff like this. And one of the issues you have with cyber theft at the foundational level, one thing Edward Snowden revealed is that you can actually steal data going across these deep net, these undersea cables, for example, through the switches. And there's also landing stations in different countries like China, for example, where basically all data goes through. And China, as was proven by, for example, Project 2049 Institute, which is a pretty good think tank, they had reports showing that at all these different landing stations in China, you had Chinese military presence right by it. I believe with the organizations have changed. I believe it was General Staff Department, 4th Department or 2nd Department. 4th Department would have been the Electronics Intelligence branch. 2nd Department would have been Human Intelligence. So I don't know what the U.S. equivalents of those would be, but basically, electronics intelligence versus human intelligence. But basically meaning, yeah, they had all the assets there to basically steal any type of data going through those networks, meaning that it didn't matter what kind of cybersecurity you had, didn't matter what laws you had in place, didn't matter what, arguments you had about stealing from companies. They were just rerouting all of our traffic through their networks and steal, everything is visible on it. They can steal anything they wanted. Then what else do? They passed the national security law, but different from the one they had in Hong Kong. And this made it so that all data needs to be secure and controllable. And so the Chinese Communist Party, under their laws, would require any data being used in the country to be both visible and controllable by the regime, by the government, meaning that there was no such thing as any company operating in China, whether it's a Chinese company or a foreign company, right? No such thing as a company operating in China that could work with data and not let the CCP have access to that data. You would not be allowed in the country. You would be violating the law of that country if you refused to do that. And so when you talk about the risk of China having 5G, one of the issues you have is emitted energy. Basically, a lot of these things work by, basically tapping into electromagnetic fields. And 5G versus 4G can access much more subtle parts of these fields. But there's also an emission type thing that, of course, through that emission, you can do different types of cyber attacks with that. I won't go too deep into this, but if you get into like military type stuff, they do have military groups that focus specifically on electronic warfare, like I don't know how public they are, like the Gray Ghosts, for example, which is a U.S. force, like the Chinese military's electronic warfare branches. They'll do these types of things. Gray Ghosts will deploy with troops to conduct electronic warfare operations, usually embedded with different units and such, things like that. In other words, it's a warfare category. And if you get into warfare within the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the light spectrum on which 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, all this exists, that's where you start battling for control of information, dominance of information, kicking people out of frequencies, and using other types of war technologies like microwave technologies, electromagnetic pulse technologies. U.S. actually has even flyover EMP weapons, things like this. They've demonstrated them. They have these things. And so there's a lot of things you can do within the weaponization of these fields and within the control of these fields, from basic stuff like stealing information to high-end stuff like using them as actual weapons technologies. Chinese Communist Party has documents on this. You can look into the reports, for example, on what do they call it? The Assassin's Mace program. It's also translated as the Trump card program. Michael Pillsbury in the 100-Year Marathon notes some of these tactics, although I don't think he gets too deep into electronic warfare weapons. But the Chinese Communist Party in their documents do talk about experimenting on weapons like this. In fact, some really disturbing stuff, right? Really disturbing stuff, like how they tested it on animals and things like this, and the way that these things would affect things. Now, I won't go too deep into this. I know I'm already kind of far into this, but there's two categories of weapons within these, I don't know, you call it subcategory. Directed energy weapon being electromagnetic field, the spectrum of light. And there's also sonic weapons, which would be the spectrum of sound. You might remember the sonic attacks on U.S. diplomats in Cuba, for example, which was one of those weapon types. Media originally denied they existed. It later proved that these things were real. And so anyone telling you they don't exist doesn't know what they're talking about. Let's just put it that way. All right, let's see here. This is from Monica Morris. He said, "What about gun sanctuary cities? Yeah. Can't I declare a CHOP or Chaz site on my a personal property, like they had in Seattle, and have a warlord, and we can hand out firearms like the warlord and the Chaz site in Seattle was doing?" It didn't seem that the Democrats cared much about people literally handing out weapons of war on the streets of Seattle after they had declared that they had a separate country and were declaring themselves independent of the U.S., basically launching an insurrection, and the local Democrats were encouraging it. And they were handing out firearms on the street and killed 2 kids. Democrats didn't seem to care that much about that. So maybe if we declare Chaz sites on our homes, we'll actually be okay. It's worth a shot. But being realistic, right? Being realistic, you will see different states push back against this, as we're seeing in Utah, as we're seeing with several states right now that do have protections on gun rights. Like I said, what we're going to see, I think, is a pretty big national discussion on, one, what is the actual impact of gun control, of gun restrictions. Really, it's not really gun control, it's gun restrictions. What is the actual impact of gun control? Does it actually make people safer, or does it make places more violent and have higher crime? Well, you can look at places with the tightest gun control in the country. Typically, they have pretty high crime. You're going to look at that, and you're also going to look at different states that have refused to do it and how the federal government deals with states like that. This is going to be a big, big discussion in this country as this moves forward. This is from... This is from Randolph. You said, "Hey Josh, why don't you drink Coca-Cola today? Live it up." Yeah. So the drink today is homemade kombucha. Once again, I have a new recipe where I got some ginseng and I put it in a second bottle. Once I do the initial brew, I put it in a ginseng bottle and I store it in there and continue brewing. Add a bit of honey. It's amazing. It's so good. Highly recommended for those of you who make kombucha. Put a bit of ginseng in it within the secondary brew, not the one with the mushrooms like the scobies. All right, this is from Julie Bond. He said, "Hi Josh, happy Valentine's Day." Yeah, thanks Julie, and happy Valentine's Day to all of you as well. This is from Beth Dinero Snell. You said, "When does federal law supersede state law?" It's complicated. Technically, well, this is going to be a big discussion, right? You could say the Civil War was technically fought over the argument of state law versus federal law. Yes, slavery was part of the reason we had the Civil War, but slavery brought up the debate around state rights versus federal rights. In other words, to what degree does state law end and federal law begin, or federal law end and state law begin? Now, the thinking of of course, Lincoln at the time was basically that, well, look, our Declaration of Independence and the nature of our country based on the Constitution doesn't support slavery. And is a country that supports basically the ideas of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, federal law should supersede states that choose to violate that. But different states, a lot of people in the Confederacies did not fight against the North based on the belief solely in, they wanted to support slavery. No, it's because they wanted to fight for state rights. And so this has been a debate going on in the U.S. for a long time now. We saw different pieces of this. We've seen, for example, Ample Fourth, that's a good point. He said, "Please use powers, not rights for government." That's true, actually. Governments have powers, not rights. We have the rights, and we give them powers to protect our rights, right? Government is instituted among men to protect our God-given rights, not the other way around. So back on your question, you're saying, when does federal law supersede state law? It's going to be debatable, because we saw, for example, back when drug laws were much, much harsher than they are now. Ironically, Biden and Clinton and these guys being the real tough on crime politicians earlier on, even creating some of the real tight drug laws that put a lot of young black men in jail for like their entire lives. A lot of people still in prison are because of the laws they passed. They changed that, but what you saw, the way that changed when it started turning, was that at the federal level, you had very tight drug laws, but at the state level, you started having different states refusing to enforce those drug laws, where states were decriminalizing marijuana and so on. And by decriminalizing them, they were not recognizing the federal laws that would put the restrictions on them. We could see the same thing happening right now. We could actually see the same thing happen right now when it comes to the gun laws. We could see, for example, different states say that, okay, the federal government is declaring that it's now illegal to own certain types of firearms, but we as a state are going to decriminalize the ownership of firearms. They could easily do that. And I think we'll see things similar to that being done, actually. All right, this is from Edward Holsey. He said, "Hey, people, Epoch Times is in great need of our financial support." Thank you. They're hanging on by a string. Please subscribe and donate. This type of interaction that Josh is doing is in jeopardy. Please support Epoch Times. I appreciate it. Real quick, several channels of the Epoch Times have been demonetized fully by YouTube, including this channel, including I think 6 or 7 others. And so, we do not make any profit right now on YouTube other than the support you folks give us. Now, so if you do want to support Crossroads, we do have a Patreon and a donor box. We're looking into some other options. Give us a bit of time. I'll keep you all updated on this. We are looking into some other options. In the meantime, though, if you do want to support, Tiffany Meyer, people are asking, she does China in Focus and Deep Dive. Both of her channels have also been demonetized. Now, we're not going anywhere. Don't worry. We're going to look, if we even get kicked off fully, we'll look for other options. So don't worry about it. But of course, we do basically get by on support from you folks. So if you do want to support us, please consider subscribing to the Epoch Times. Please consider donating if you have the means. We do have a donor box, again, which I recommend. And we also have a Patreon. You can find the link to those in the description. I'll do one more question, and then we'll get into some more stories. This is from Andrew Vance. You said, will you guys be covering about Windham Co. and Ukraine news because we are not going away? Let me look into it. I haven't been following that, to be honest. Oh, Crazy Morp, you're asking, how is UMaker coming along? UMaker is a partner of Epoch Times. UMaker is like a YouTube replacement. It still needs a bit of work. We're looking into some other options, folks, so I'll keep you updated. We are looking into other options, and maybe we'll have some very good news for you soon. Let's put it that way. I'll do one more question here. This is from Ramasor. You said, hi, Joshua. Can Trump go after those liars during impeachment? We'll have to see what Trump does. In fact, let's get into that because actually I have some updates on what Trump is doing. I want to go over with you first on Trump's speech and then also what Trump is going to be doing going forward because he's now talking about what he may be doing. Real quick, also, good news. Those of you who watch this show might note that I've talked about some other channels that have been deleted by YouTube. One of them was Terce Livre, which is Alando Santos. He's a journalist in Brazil, one of the few big independent journalists in Brazil. YouTube totally deleted his YouTube channel, and he actually pushed back against it in the Brazilian courts, and the Brazilian Supreme Court ruled in his favor and ordered YouTube to restore his channel. And so actually a big battle against big tech censorship was just won in Brazil, and Terce Livre is being restored through that. Now, if only our own government here would have the integrity of Brazil to fight back against censorship, but we'll have to see how this goes. All right, folks. Let's go into what's happening now with Trump and with what's happening as well with the impeachment and what happened with that. Real quick, Beth Coddington, he said, Larry Elder is one of my favorites. Yeah, Larry Elder also has a show with Epoch Times, and he has also been demonetized. All right, let's go into this now. Epoch Times reporting here, Donald Trump's full statement on impeachment, trial, acquittal. Now, I'll go over, folks, with you just his full statement because it's not that long, and I think it's worth hearing. Let's go over this now. It says, former President Donald Trump made a statement after the Senate voted to acquit him, meaning that he's not they're dropping the case. Basically, he won the case, right? That's what acquit means. They voted to acquit him in his second impeachment trial with a vote of 57 to 43. Remember, they needed a 2/3 majority to win. They got 7 Republicans in the end to vote with the Democrats, but not enough to charge him. Now, it said here, this is from Trump. This is what he said. He said, I want to first thank my team of dedicated lawyers and others for their tireless work upholding justice and defending truth. My deepest thanks as well to all of the United States senators and members of Congress who stood proudly for the Constitution we all revere and for the sacred legal principles at the heart of our country. Our cherished constitutional republic, no, not a democracy, constitutional republic, right? He says, our cherished constitutional republic was founded on the imperial rule of law, the indispensable safeguard for our liberties, our rights, and our freedoms. It is a sad commentary on our times that one political party in America is given a free pass to denigrate the rule of law, defame law enforcement, cheer mobs, excuse rioters, and transform justice into a tool of political vengeance and persecute, blacklist, cancel, and suppress all people and viewpoints with whom or which they disagree. I always have and always will be a champion for the unwavering rule of law, the heroes of law enforcement, and the right of Americans to peacefully and honorably debate the issues of the day without malice and without hate. Trump continues, quote, this has been yet another phase of the greatest witch hunt in the history of our country. No president has ever gone through anything like it. And it continues because our opponents cannot forget the almost 75 million people, the highest number ever for a sitting president, who voted for us just a few short months ago. I also want to convey my gratitude to the millions of decent, hardworking, law-abiding, God-and-country-loving citizens who have bravely supported these important principles in these very difficult and challenging times. Our historic, patriotic, and beautiful movement to make America great again has only just begun. In the months ahead, I have much to share with you, and I look forward to continuing our incredible journey together to achieve American greatness for all of our people. There has never been anything like it. We have so much work ahead of us, and soon we will emerge with a vision for a bright, radiant, and limitless American future. Together, there is nothing we cannot accomplish. We remain one people, one family, and one glorious nation under God. And it's our responsibility to preserve this magnificent inheritance for our children and for generations of Americans to come. May God bless all of you, and may God forever bless the United States of America. Now, that's from Trump, right? Now, a few parts on this hinting at what he may be doing next. He says here, our historic, patriotic, and beautiful movement to make America great again, which is, of course, his slogan. I'm sure you all know it. Right? He says, has only just begun. And he says, in the months ahead, I have much to share with you. And I look forward to continuing our incredible journey together to achieve American greatness for all of our people. So what is he saying? He's saying in the next few months, in the months ahead, he's going to share something with us. And he looks forward to continuing this work of making America great again. This, quote, historic, patriotic, and beautiful movement, as he describes it. And very likely we're going to see him, as I was saying before, that I think he was kind of laying low during the impeachment process, right? I think he was, again, waiting for the impeachment process to go through. And once he passed that, because anything he said or did during that time would have been used against him. We saw this during his entire presidency, where he makes a phone call conducting what presidents do, calling foreign leaders. And, next thing you know, they're trying to impeach him based on rumors people spread based on what he said in the phone call. And of course, it gets debunked and they try to impeach him anyway. He saw, for example, that any statement he made can not only be used against him, but also reframed, rebranded, and lied about in order to work as a new political tool to create a new scandal to target him. Now, Trump is now a private citizen. Trump is no longer president of the United States. He's the former president, as his office of the former president now says, meaning that he is now also endowed with the protections of a private citizen, meaning the ability to sue for libel if he can demonstrate, or defamation, if he can demonstrate ill intent and intentional lying, which really, when he was president, he could have deeply and heavily done, meaning that different individuals lying about him and using those lies to target him maliciously, he can actually sue them now for that, meaning that it's going to be very hard for them to create scandals against him as we go forward. At the same time, Trump is also a very wealthy individual, as we all know, even though he lost a good roughly half of his wealth by becoming president, which is typically the opposite of what we see when people go into office. Typically, you see different public leaders getting rich in ways that their salaries don't encompass after they take office through various methods. But Trump still has a lot of money, and using that, he wants to, as he stated previously, he wants to get involved with community organizing, activism, things like this. It's very possible we could see Trump start again Trump rallies. It's very possible we could see Trump again start up things to rally up the American people behind different issues and start pushing forward towards 2022 to change the House and the Senate. We're going to see Trump get involved in the grassroots of this country. Now, before he was president, working from the presidential level, working on the laws, working on foreign relations, that type of stuff, right? Federal level. Now we're going to see Trump working from the bottom up, changing the culture of this country, changing the institutions of this country, and working on things from the foundational levels upward. Trump is now a grassroots movement, not a sitting president. And watching this unfold is going to be very, very interesting. I'll tell you that right now. All right, folks, let's go into a few other parts to this. Now, Teresa Avila said, "Awesome! I will. We love the Epoch Times in English and Spanish. Thank you. Yeah, actually, we do have Spanish edition. Those of you who don't know. And actually, I've personally done interviews with a lot of big Spanish media, including, I've done quite a few actually. Um, yeah, but of course, Terce Livre. I've been on some of the one of the biggest media in Peru. I've done quite a few actually in Latin America. I'm more talking about China, of course. All right, next part on this, folks. Let's see. Now, suggesting Trump's next move. This is the next article here. It says Graham, this is Senator Lindsey Graham, a Republican, of course. It says Graham says he plans to meet with Trump to discuss GOP's future. In other words, Graham is meeting with Trump to discuss the future of the Republican Party. It says here, Senator Lindsey Graham is planning a confab with former President Donald Trump to discuss the Republican Party's future. Graham told reporters in Washington on Friday that he wants Trump to work with the GOP in its bid to flip the House of Representatives and Senate in the 2022 midterm elections. And he said this according to Graham, quote, "I'm going to try to convince him that we can't get there without you," in other words, without Trump, "but you can't keep the Trump movement going without the GOP united. If we come back in 2022, then it's an affirmation of your policies. But if we lose again in 2022, then the narrative is going to continue that not only you lost the White House, but the Republican Party is in a bad spot. Trump's got to work with everybody," Graham added. And he continued, "You got to put your best team on the field. If it's about revenge and going after people you don't like, we're going to have a problem. If this is about putting your best team on the field, we've got a decent chance at coming back." Now, Trump is not really making many public statements on this, but Graham is suggesting he's going to approach Trump and talk to Trump about what Trump is already planning to do, which is working on flipping the House and the Senate back to the Republicans. Now, yeah, but Graham has already kind of turned on Trump. I think what we're seeing here is basically he realizes that, well, the Republicans who voted to impeach Trump are actually getting a lot of flack right now, especially in their home states and especially at risk of being censured. Very likely Trump is going to, as he works to overturn many of these seats, even overturn the seats of many of these Republicans who people who supported the Trump movement are not going to vote for in the future. Meaning that anybody who has now voted against Trump has voted against the future of the party if Trump succeeds in doing what he says he's going to be doing, which is trying to overturn back again to the Republicans, the House, and the Senate. Now, originally, and yeah, actually, I personally don't think we'll have to see how Trump does. Trump is actually pretty forgiving with folks like this. We'll have to see what he does. He actually might work with Graham, but it's not clear because I think he might see Graham as someone who has his own agenda. And Trump is going to be looking to get rid of people through the election process who don't support really the American people as he sees it. He's going to be very likely trying to overturn their seats and very likely working on maybe vetting a bit better in terms of who he supports, different individuals who will run for different seats to overturn the House and the Senate. And actually, Republicans don't need to overturn many seats. They only need like 1 or 2 seats to overturn the Senate. It's a 50-50 split right now. Kamala Harris counts as the tie-breaking vote. If Republicans get 2 seats to overturn the Kamala Harris vote, they'd have the majority. Now, Republicans don't always vote in lockstep. That's important to note, right? Republicans do not always vote in lockstep, meaning that they break from the pack, so to speak, whereas Democrats typically vote in packs. They typically march in lockstep. And so very likely they need to overturn more than just 2 seats in the Senate, maybe 5 seats. They don't need to win that many to win a majority back. Same thing with the House. Republicans only need to overturn really not many, like 17 roughly House seats, 14 House seats. They don't need to overturn that many. And they've identified in the House I believe it was 47 different seats that are up for re-election that they believe they can win. And so they actually have a lot going for them. Now, I know a lot of folks are concerned about election integrity, and rightly so. Keep in mind that a lot of the changes to election laws that really did weaken the election system were not done through the state legislatures. They were done oftentimes through the governors who bypassed the state legislatures, meaning that a lot of what was done going forward would be very difficult for them to do. And already you have the state legislatures, even in places like Pennsylvania and Arizona, possibly being able to turn things around. We'll have to see how this works. And yeah, some people are saying Trump will be kinder and gentler. Actually, he might be. One of the big things we'll see going forward, those of you who, really, of course, didn't follow the mainstream media and really maybe even read the original sources or followed Epoch Times, you might have seen the full context of a lot of the quotes that were used to criticize Trump. Oftentimes, his quotes were taken out of context. Oftentimes, he was personally attacked for things he didn't really say. Oftentimes, he was framed as being responsible for things that went back to the Obama administration, like the kids in cages, for example. First of all, a fake photo op. It was a protest they used to do the main photo, not actual holding facilities. And of course, the later holding facilities they revealed were created by Obama, not by Trump, right? But media didn't care about that. They went after him regardless for it. There were many things like that. But as again, you're going to have now Trump as a private citizen, meaning that Trump has legal protections and the ability to sue, including big media, if they lie about him. And they already have, through their track record, demonstrated malintent, malicious intent. In other words, if they lie about him, his ability to sue them will be very, very high, right? Because if you're a public figure, the laws for that are a bit different. They're a bit deeper. It's a bit harder to sue. You have to demonstrate not only that they knowingly reported false information on you, not only did they knowingly, right, defame you, report false information, but that they did so with malicious intent. And Trump at this point, having media who hate his guts, right, and have hated his guts for a long time and have lied about him a lot, he already has the malicious intent thing pretty much down for most of these individuals because they couldn't keep their mouths shut in social media, and demonstrating their malicious intent towards Trump will not be very difficult. Many of them very openly state their malicious intent towards Trump, right? In fact, if you don't state malicious intent towards Trump, you yourself might get attacked in some places. And in addition to that, right, if they lie about him, which is the only way they can really do to him what they did before, they can get sued. And so, yes, you're going to see if they cover Trump, their ability to misrepresent his statements, their ability to lie about him, their ability to defame him, it's going to be deeply, deeply difficult for them to do that now that he's not president. And if they do that, Trump can be suing these big media left and right, and I bet you he would consider it at the very least. In fact, I think he would love to sue some of these individuals who he knows are lying about him. And so, yeah, if they choose to even cover him, you're going to be seeing a much more friendly Trump, very likely. You're going to be seeing a much more friendly Trump, very likely in the headlines. Although, frankly, it's unlikely that they're going to give him a lot of coverage, I'd say, which is going to be difficult for them because really, Trump makes headlines. Trump gets traffic. Trump made a lot of these people famous. And Trump, him falling out of the news headlines, is making a lot of these big media like CNN lose a whole lot of viewers. Because look, all Biden all the time, cheerleading media because they're not going to report negatively on Biden. That's not that interesting, right? The media can only, report, look what our grand leader did today so many times a day before people stop reading them. And they're probably not going to be criticizing Biden, right? Because it goes against the lockstep interests they typically have. And so they're in a catch-22 right now, right? The media are going to be the catch-22 with all this. They can't just keep reporting boring news, right? And just keep reporting nothing critical and nothing deep and nothing, unless they cover feature stories or whatever and try to go on that. And at the same time, they're going to want to cover Trump. But if they cover Trump and they can't defame him, it's going to be very difficult for them to do that because they're going to be wanting to defame him very likely, a lot of these media. And it's going to be hard for them, let's put it that way. We'll, of course, be following this as we go forward, right? All right, folks, let's see here. All right, it's getting quite late, so I think I'll call it a night here, folks. Now, I mentioned I'm going to be doing fewer live Q&As 3 times a week now because I'm going to be focusing on some more in-depth type content. My goal right now is to start doing at least once a week some kind of in-depth feature. And I want to put together some TV quality, really more heavy-hitting, lasting reports that I think will have more of a benefit to this country and to other countries, actually. I want to put together I want to do a documentary quality feature on the history of communism. I want to do a documentary quality feature on what this country, what the United States is really founded on, maybe even looking at what they did with the 1776 project and seeing how they did it. I want to start putting together features like this. And so I'm going to be reducing the lives to 3 times a week instead of 6. I apologize. I do enjoy doing these, but just based on timing, I don't have the time to do both. And so I want to dedicate some time to doing that real in-depth quality work that I think will have a much bigger impact. And I think you folks will really like it once we start as well. So, and I'll still be traveling. I'll still be doing side features. I have one on Texas coming out soon. You're going to like, and I'll still be doing, of course, the interviews and so on. And hoping to, again, with these big features, to push back on some of the false narratives coming out, really give some really strong reporting on the deeper issues impacting not just the United States, but the world. And so I'm going to be working hard on that. Going forward, folks, every Sunday, Tuesday, and Thursday, I'll be doing the lives. So again, tune in on Tuesday. I'll be here again doing a live 10:30 p.m. Eastern time. So Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, tune in for the lives. All right, folks, appreciate all of you. And as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you. Americans gradually losing faith in the different institutions this country is built upon, including now the electoral system, and including now as well the systems of justice. Now, America, on both sides, people are concerned about the integrity of our country, the integrity of the systems this country is built upon. And going forward, this country needs more than ever to find a way to reconcile with this corruption as they observe it, whether you're Democrat or Republican, observing politicians they believe do not represent them, observing justice systems they believe have not acted in accordance with the grievances they brought to them. The country right now is in a state of disarray and a state of hopelessness. And moving forward, I think more than ever, people need a ray of hope. People need to realize and understand once again, and see proof of it, that the system represents their interests, that the representatives we have in these offices represent the American people and not personal interest, that the systems of elections represent the will of the people and not the will of a handful of individuals who may not be willing to hear information or be willing to look at information. The United States is in a very desperate state right now. And for the world as well, this goes even deeper, because America was the beacon of hope. America was the model of a free society. America was the system on which the image of a free and open society was built. And many countries look to the United States as a model for their own countries, their own model for what a free and self-governing people look like. That model is now being damaged. That image is now being damaged. And countries are now wondering what model to look at. As we go forward, the Chinese Communist Party very likely will use this. The Chinese Communist Party will very likely try to rebuild itself. And the CCP's China model, as they call it, will become a competitor to the U.S. model on the global stage. This is where the United States and the world are now at.